When the chance comes to interview the boss, you just have to take it. As promised, my second YouTube video will be focused on the interview I had with Apple's Vice President for Environment, Community and Social Initiatives, Lisa Jackson. But first, I want to talk through what it was like getting the opportunity, my kind of decision-making process in taking on this role, and what the trip was like, what I saw there, and kind of my overall experience. And then at the end of this video, it will be the full interview with Lisa Jackson. Now, I've already edited a version of this interview for social media, so I think it was about 3 minutes long because that's the limit of what I can post online. It kind of hit some talking points, but obviously I had to condense it a lot for social media. So I thought this would be the perfect place for me to put the full interview that you can see that I had with her, all the questions I got to ask, the bit where I was a little bit rushed because my time was up, and kind of my feedback on the things she was saying and the things I saw out in Spain. So this all came about because a few weeks ago, I got a call from a guy at Apple inviting me to Segovia, which is on the outskirts of Madrid, with their team and the press association from the UK, and then journalists from loads of other countries to go and interview a woman called Lisa Jackson. As he was describing the trip to me, I was very aware of the exclusivity of an opportunity like this. I think working in fashion, I am constantly challenging the bosses, constantly challenging billionaire corporations, but very rarely do you get an opportunity to go and sit down with them and talk to the person who makes decisions. Now, this could be like H&M, Shein, Boohoo, Zara. If one of those companies reached out to me and says, look, you can get a sit down like 10 minutes to ask any questions you like with the boss, you're not getting paid to go, and you can ask whatever you want, I would 100% take that chance. It's well and good being someone online who speaks to a camera or to an audience and a community, and we have these conversations, but ultimately the big opportunity is to go and like not shout in the face of the corporations, but like to an extent go and say the things that I've wanted to say to them for years. Apple for me are an interesting company. Like, they're part of our lives, inevitably so. And, you know, I'm recording things on Apple devices, I work on an Apple device, I wrote my PhD thesis on an Apple device, and they've been part of our lives basically since, I don't know, maybe adolescence, I guess. I'm 32 now, so my first Apple device was like iPhone 6 because I couldn't afford anything before that. But it's part of our daily lives now. So I have a particular gripe kind of with companies who are inevitably part of our lives, and we kind of have to somewhat subscribe to them and support them in some way or another. Now, for me, subscribing and working with a brand like that in my daily life, just as part of being an adult who works online, I have always bought refurbished tech from them. I buy secondhand. I give my items to family members or resell them after I've done with them. And I'm very much against subscribing to this constant newness that technology have embedded into our lives for the last decade or so. Apple in particular have a couple of touch points which I was very keen to ask them. So prior to me flying out to Spain, and I'll tell you more about what I was there to see, but prior to that, I was like already thinking of questions that I wanted to ask them, and they revolved around the human rights issues, the ethical implications of the business, things like Congo, Rwanda, minerals, mining, exploitation, all of those things. But of course, prior to me flying out, I had to send over some questions. So I was like, okay, here are basically the hits. And I felt this innate responsibility for my audience and my community to ask the questions that they would want to ask and they would want me to ask. And it's a lot of responsibility. And I kind of felt quite heavy with that. I was like, I can't go and make it look like I'm working with Apple or for Apple, but I also want to tell an authentic story. I want to be authentic in myself and not kind of be pressured into dumbing myself down and, you know, nodding along just because, they've flown me to Spain and showed me something that was under embargo and it's the exclusivity thing and all that stuff. So I still had to remain my own self. But yeah, it was quite a big responsibility after I said yes to the trip. So the trip itself, I flew to Madrid. It was just one night over in Segovia. And what Apple have done is they've invested heavily in solar farm projects throughout Europe. The first one being the one that I was seeing in Segovia. Now, this solar farm was absolutely enormous. Obviously, out in the sticks, Segovia is such a charming place to be. I actually visited whilst I lived in Madrid when I was doing my PhD. It's got this amazing aqueduct. It reminded me a little bit of Florence just because of the architecture and how old the city is. And then, yeah, there was this enormous solar farm. So we got driven out to... So first of all, actually, we were at the hotel where we were staying. All of the Apple team were there. And we had kind of a briefing with one of the delegates from Apple who works with Lisa Jackson. And she talked through the best slideshow presentation I've ever seen. It was kind of like an Apple ad where all the things are moving. It was just actually amazing. But at the end, she was like, right, does anyone have any questions? And myself and a person from the Press Association from the UK, we were the only people from the UK there. So again, I was like, I'm really lucky to be here. And they specifically wanted someone, I should have said this, they specifically wanted someone who had a journalistic approach, but worked in content production as well. So that's why they chose me. Very flattering. But the girl from the Press Association and our hands went straight up. I was like, okay, what about this? What about this? What about this? And even though they given us, I think out of all the trips I've done and all the interviews that I've done, I have never been given so much information in my life. So like even the night before the interview day, they sent like a 127-page report, then another report and another report, and then a profile on Lisa Jackson, and then a link to the Apple website no mere mortal has ever ventured to before, full of information about everything from batteries to production to net zero to carbon neutrality to renewable energy, everything you could think of. They kind of had somewhat an answer for something, even though I still had questions after getting answers. So yeah, we had this briefing and got to ask a lot of questions. And the questions I asked then were kind of the things that I'd sent a couple of days before. And the Apple team basically said, look, we don't want to use the time that you have with Lisa asking questions that we've already responded to publicly. And these were things like the mining in Africa, the minerals that are used in their devices, and the history of Apple over the last couple of years with, issues that they've encountered. And I was like, I understand that, but for me and my audience, I think it's nice to hear something come from a human's mouth. So even though you've responded to these things publicly, they're always buried in like HR written press releases and jargon and deeply buried in reports. And the average person who buys an Apple product isn't ever going to have read that or might have just missed it in the news. They see the scandal and then they never see the reply or whatever it is. So I just wanted to give them an opportunity really to say in person like an answer to the questions that actually were in the comment section of the video I posted. And they were like, yeah, we understand, we can get that, but you have a limited time with Lisa, so make sure you ask the questions that you want to ask about the thing that you're there to see. So what I was there to see was an enormous solar farm to provide renewable energy to the grid. So this is part of Apple's 2030 plan. This specific part of their Apple 2030 plan was to provide enough renewable energy to the grid so that it covers you and I when we charge our devices or power our devices. There is a difference between those two, which I asked about because that was another thing that confused me. The difference is a Mac, for example, is always plugged in, so that's powered, and charging a device is like when you charge your iPhone or your MacBook, whatever it is. That's the difference. So they want to put enough renewable energy into the grid to cover our usage, so customer usage of energy when we charge and power devices. So even though you and I might not have renewable energy at our power source, Apple have supplied enough to the grid to cover our usage of energy. So I'm going to fast forward now. I'm going to show you some, if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see some footage now of me in Spain, in Segovia, walking through the solar farm, learning about what it is, the scale, the farmers that they've partnered with for the solar farm so that it protects their livelihood, the biodiversity and the habitats that are surrounding the solar farms, and the animals that are all around there. Now, usually when fashion brands approach me to work for them online, it's a pretty easy yes or no. Usually because if they're paying me to do some content, or if they're paying me to do some research into their brand and then communicate that to you, I will know pretty quickly whether it's a brand that I want to be aligned with. But with this one, it needed a lot more nuance and critical thought. So obviously I called a few friends who are a good sense check, and I sat and wrote a list of pros and cons of doing the job. The pros is actually something that is frustrating working online in sustainability. And originally it's kind of a con, but I think in this way it worked out well for me. And that it was the fact that I wasn't going to be paid. Now, Apple are the world's most valuable brand, like $3 trillion is their market cap. And if anyone's going to be paying creators fairly, it should be a business like them. But in not paying me, it means that I still have my journalistic integrity. So I can go and ask any question I want because they're not buying the content. They're not paying for the content. And whilst it's great that they can fly me out and put me up in a nice hotel in Segovia, that also doesn't purchase my opinion. Also, because they're not purchasing the content, it means that they don't get final sign off on what I produce. So like this video, for example, where I can talk really openly about the opportunity, and the Instagram and TikTok videos I posted about it too, I can say in those videos, this isn't an ad and I'm not being paid to say any of this. I'm here as a journalist and I'm here to ask questions on behalf of you and show you Apple's new project. Me showing you Apple's new project and making a video about it are two separate things, and they don't have to coalesce into it looking like a paid partnership. Now, the reason this is usually a problem is because some of the big brands that I've worked with before actually pay the worst. But it's one of those kind of caveats where, like, I love working for small, independent, responsible businesses that have no budget or really low budgets because it's the thing that I care about. Now, that can often be misconstrued as, well, you care about this thing and I care about this thing, so therefore you should work for free because, you care. And I'm like, my landlord doesn't care. And there's almost like this demand and expectance placed on me to work for free or work for peanuts very, very often. So I have to find this middle ground. And sometimes it's actually nice that I can take my full fat rate off some brand so that it can subsidize a lower rate from a brand that's really small or just starting out, or profiling emerging designers, or doing Fashion Week at my own cost and at my own expense, because there's designers there that I think deserve to be platformed. So I'm going to fast forward now to the interview with Lisa Jackson, and you will see that interview. I know you've waited now a long time to hear or see that interview. When I looked into her prior to the interview, I wanted to get a gauge of whether she was a true environmentalist or whether she was hired by Apple as kind of like a PR person that has this like ambassadorial role almost. Now, when I looked into Lisa, Barack Obama hired her to work in his government on environmental policies, and then 12 or 13 years ago was hired by Apple and has worked there since in their environmental program. I've often challenged these brands very, very aggressively. And it means that you rarely get a chance to talk to them directly. More often than not, you get blocked by these brands. For example, all of the Kamani family have blocked me, who own Boohoo, and I now can't even tag them in stories. They've blocked me on Twitter, literally everywhere. So I won't get a chance to speak to them directly. On the flip side of that, I also think that we need true environmentalists to go and work in these brands, like Amazon, which are another absolute crazy beast of environmental and ethical issues, and the fast fashion and ultra fast fashion brands. If we have enough real, true environmentalists who are willing to go and like battle from the inside to change these brands, it might inflict some sort of change from within. And another example of that is the former boss of H&M, Helena Helmerson, and she worked at H&M for years. and eventually became the CEO. Now, prior to her becoming CEO, she held loads of different roles, but they were all focused on environmental stuff. And I think her kind of pathway through H&M was so that she could get to the top and actually change the business. Now, she lasted a few years and then stepped down. And now this might be conjecture, but I would propose that she got to the top and was kind of fed up of wrestling with a beast that won't change and stepped down. I was kind of trying to gauge this with Lisa Jackson. Is she someone who truly cares about the environment and is working at Apple because they're an enormous brand, and changing them just a little bit will have a massive ripple effect? At times, it was a little bit like interviewing a very well media trained politician at times, but also it was flexible and informal enough to have a personable approach. Because to me, the elephant in the room with all these fast fashion brands that have sustainable initiatives is that they won't make less stuff, which is the single most impactful thing any brand can do. And one of the things that Apple sent me prior to this interview, I'm going to maybe conflate some of the stats here, but it was along the lines of, since 2008, the amount of emissions it takes to build an iPhone has been reduced massively, which is great. But since 2008 means, and I looked this up straight away, in 2008, Apple only had iPhone 1. They sold around, I think it was like 6 or 7 million iPhone 1s. They sold 6 or 7 million iPhone 1s. So I was like, that's amazing on the surface. But then you look up how many iPhones were sold for like iPhone 14 and 15 and 16 and 17. And at one point, they sold, I think it's iPhone 15, they sold 70 million iPhone 15s. And then like 40 million iPhone 16s, and so on and so on. It's nowadays between 35 and like 65, 70 million iPhones every time they launch a new one. So whilst it's great reducing the amount of emissions that are produced in manufacturing an iPhone, when you're selling 10 times more iPhones, it's a whole nother layer to production scales and waste and e-waste and recyclability. And the other thing that I really wanted to ask, which I asked kind of in a different way, was whilst you're making a lot of strides to decrease your carbon emissions and do all these things with renewable energy and clean energy, do you ever acknowledge the fact that Apple have, in a way that like fashion does too, you have kind of embedded this social desirability and through your marketing and clever influence, that having a new iPhone makes you relevant and makes you socially desirable and makes your friends like you more. And it's tied into this thing that every year when you see someone on the tube with the new iPhone, you're like, oh my God, that's the new iPhone. Apple has some responsibility there about that. The same way that fast fashion brands release new styles weekly because it makes you think that if you don't buy the new style, your friends won't like you as much. Or if you don't buy the new style, you won't have anything to post on Instagram and then you'll become less relevant. And when I asked this question, their answer was basically placing most of that responsibility on the consumer. And they're like, look guys, we just make phones. It's completely up to the consumer when they want to upgrade. It kind of made me think, yeah, we do kind of need to take back control of when and how intentionally we buy things. I don't need the new iPhone. I have my stuff until they completely do not serve the purpose that I require them for. And then I might think about parting ways with them. I work chronically online. My job is to create content. It's to write. It's to go and film the things that I do day to day with work. And then I see people whose main purpose of having a phone is to consume content and call and text their friends, have a better iPhone than I have. Why? And it's linked to this social desirability. That phone does way more things than you need it to do. It's so that you can show people that you have the new iPhone. And therefore it gives you this kind of social prowess to lord over other people. So anyway, that was kind of another tangent, but something to dissect too. So now I'm going to stop talking, and the next thing you will see in here is my interview with Lisa Jackson, who is the Vice President for Environment, Policy and Social Initiatives at Apple, who reports directly to Tim Cook. So I hope you like it, and please, as always, ask any questions you like in the comments. Please do subscribe, and maybe share this video with someone who you think will appreciate it. From what I've seen today, the development of multiple solar and wind farms like Segovia will add considerable renewable energy capacity to the grid. How impactful will this be in contributing to 2030 goals?
It's an important part of our goals because it's important for people to realize the reason we're enabling or helping to enable projects like this is not for our own energy use, not even for our supplier use, but for our customers when they charge their devices, when they plug in their MacBooks or their iPhones or their iPads. And so that's about 29% of our footprint. So we have to think ahead to 2030 to make sure by 2030 we have enough energy that we've enabled to cover that. And this, these and the projects that we've done so far cover about a third of that need across our European base.
Amazing. It's nice that you're thinking outside of the realms of just your own use as well, and knowing that you have an impact with other people with giving them devices and that. Yeah. So what benefits will supplying more renewable energy to the grid not just bring to consumers in terms of covering them for their energy usage, but what other tangible benefits do you think it will bring?
Sometimes the magic of Apple is that it just works, right? It's just this delightful experience that you have. We consider this part of that. And so tangible is a hard thing. Like it's tangible in that hopefully we're supporting the clean energy economy. Hopefully our work gives a stamp of approval and, more importantly, financial backing and help to companies like IB Vote, who are trying to, make a living by helping us transition to cleaner, renewable energy. So that's very tangible, and it's something we think any company like ours should do as a leader. But the other piece is we want folks to have that delightful moment of realizing, oh, just because I chose to make this purchase and plug in, there's more energy, clean energy going on grids. And think if every company that made electronic devices had the same idea, there'd be huge investments in renewables.
Yeah, it definitely starts an effect that then has ripples throughout other industries and other companies, even if they might be competitors.
You just used Tim Cook's favorite word. He likes the idea that this can ripple out into the pond.
So given that Apple seems to be making strides towards better practices in electricity strategy, how important is not only collaboration, and we spoke about it loosely then, but also not gatekeeping knowledge and breakthroughs and having findings open access for the rest of the industry to learn from?
It's really important that we be willing to share what we're learning here because, this is a worldwide challenge for all of us. And so, unusual for Apple, we're willing to talk about it very transparently. We're willing to share information. We have a white paper out that talks about how we're approaching the energy that our customers use as part of our 2030 goal. We haven't talked about recycling, but another huge opportunity for us. And we have papers that tell how we are changing our supply chain to use more recycled material, because recycled material actually has a lower carbon footprint generally, and also is a really wonderful way for people to be able to think of their devices as part of a circular economy where devices can be used and reused a long time and eventually recycled into new devices.
Something I speak about, I have a fashion background, it's something I speak about with clothing all the time. And I think often when people make a breakthrough, it benefits them financially to gatekeep that breakthrough and gatekeep knowledge, because then it makes them the leader in the space. But realistically, if we all care about the thing that we say that we care about, knowledge should be shared, and we stand on the shoulders of giants, and that becomes more knowledge, and so on and so forth. So it's nice to hear that.
I love your approach, and I couldn't agree with you more. I also think that the advantage we have as Apple is because we do make so many devices, that if we make a change with our suppliers, more than likely they're changing not just for us.
Yeah.
And so we also have that ability to continue to share.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk about something that I know since the targets were set, Apple has made massive strides in, carbon neutrality and all those things. How much has the business grown since then, during that period? Because I know it's a very dynamic company and always expanding.
Yeah, this is actually one of my favorite things to talk about. Since 2015, which is when our emissions were the highest, we've reduced our carbon emissions, absolutely by 60%. During that same period of time, our revenues are up 65% or so. So the challenge for all of the private sector is to separate this idea we have in our heads that in order to make more and be more profitable and do well, you also have to pay a price over here. Sacrifice something. We believe you can do both. We believe that clean energy is a huge opportunity, as is recycled material. And we also really believe in the companies that are going to be part of that transition. We have a vast supply chain. And so working and adding new suppliers is just part of what we do.
Yeah, nice. I think usually it coincides. The misconceptions are usually that it's too expensive and less fruitful, and therefore you have to sacrifice profit or revenue, or you have to sacrifice the impact that you can have in terms of sustainability. Is degrowth ever something that you speak about at Apple?
We think about it, and we've been thinking about this for a long time, and I actually think we should be proud of this. We knew that technology as a sector is something that's constantly evolving. I can't tell you standing here what the next thing will be. We're all watching it happen day to day, and that people are going to need and use that technology. So we tried to think of a way that in that context, where it's constantly changing and people are going to want some of the new things, how do you build a hardware business around that? And we came up with two ideas. The first is durability. We make devices that last a very long time. And we have plenty of our customers who buy them for that reason. And they get, software upgrades for free. We've been doing that for years and years so that your device continually updates. So it's your choice. It's your choice when it's time for you to make that upgrade. And you may have reasons based on your business why it's time. Yeah. And if it's time, you have a bunch of choices. You can give your current device to someone else. You can trade it in. You can, decide to keep both, or you can decide it's really time now, and then give it back to us, and we'll recycle it and get those materials back into productive use again. Yeah. So that has been our philosophy all along. That when you couple this idea of using as much recycled material as you can with the idea of moving as much of our supply chain to clean energy, you come to a world where you can have the innovation and the forward-looking, but you don't necessarily have to pay this price on our planet.
The burden that traditionally comes along with both of those things.
That's right.
What would you say to the suggestion? I mean, I know Sorry,
we're a little past time, so we have to wrap it up.
Can I do one more? Is that okay?
You can do one more.
Okay. I'll go to a big hitting question, just like a bigger picture question.
Okay.
That I really wanted to ask you. Apple are a $3 trillion tech company. Can Apple become a sustainable $3 trillion tech company? And what would that look like?
Well, by 2030, Apple has committed to being carbon neutral. That means 75% of our emissions will be gone, eliminated. Technology hasn't helped us figure out that last 25%. We'll get there, I know, by 2050 or so. By 2050, we think we can get to 90%. So in between, we're also doing an amazing amount of work investing in sustainable forestry and projects that use nature to remove carbon from the air. To me, a sustainable company looks like Apple 2030 and what we're planning to do there.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, pleasure. Thank you.
All right.
Cheers.